So when we think of vampires, and we talk about the legend and lore behind it, a certain Irish writer by the name of Bram Stoker had many, many influences on his work. And if you're unfamiliar with the book he wrote, it's called Dracula. Classic horror novel, and I highly recommend it to anyone.
One of my absolute all-time favorites.
But one of the inspirations that he looked on when writing this book was the Countess Elizabeth Bathory d'Exced. You may have heard it Elizabeth Bathory. There's
Bathory.
There's a bunch of different pronunciations. But she's come over the years to be known as the Blood Countess, purportedly bathed in the blood of virgins. I think we'll find that some of this was exaggerated over the years, but just how much? We're gonna talk about the Blood Countess tonight.
Join us, if you will.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Well, I have down Elizabeth Bathory, however you want to pronounce it.
I'm going to say Bathory, because that's the way it's spelled, and I'm not traditionally Hungarian, so I don't know how to say it. But I have Countess Elizabeth Bathory d'Exed.
Well, regardless, was born in August 1560. A very wealthy family, nobility, kings, and royalty.
Yeah, her family owned land in the Kingdom of Hungary, which is now Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania.
And right over there by Transylvania at the time.
And I believe a lot of her family was Transylvanian nobility, the voivoda?
Yes.
However you say it.
Yep, however you want to say it. But obviously, yeah, some of the direct family was reported, however, to have epileptic convulsions, anger management issues, if you will.
Well, as a child, she suffered a lot of health issues. And have multiple seizures that were attributed to epilepsy. Mm-hmm. At the time, symptoms were usually diagnosed as what they called the falling sickness.
I noticed that, yeah, of course, epilepsy, that word didn't exist. The falling, because they would often convulse and fall down. And
possibly sort of the groundwork for later parts of Elizabeth's story. The treatment included rubbing the blood of a non-sufferer on the lips of the epileptic. And
get the first touches of blood on the skin. Yeah.
Or supposedly also giving the patient a mix of the non-sufferer's blood and a piece of their skull as an episode ended. That would help.
That's right out of like caveman Viking stuff there.
And again, like I said, maybe this is maybe this is what started down that path. Who knows?
Now she also had a marriage that was already arranged while she was the age of 8. Already her family had prearranged a wedding that would take place a couple years later. To and I'm going to butcher this name, Ferenc II Nadisi, or something along those lines. Yeah, she was only married once. Now, there was some talks that she had an affair with a young nobleman by a different name.
But yeah, at age 13, she allegedly gave birth to a child.
And that was like a stable hand or something.
Yeah, fathered by a peasant.
Mm-hmm.
And that she supposedly gave away to a local...
Well, and the story I took was she was madly in love with this peasant boy, stable boy, and the mother stepped in and said, oh no, he's not good enough for royal. And as we all know, royal families, especially at that time, there was, we'll use the word inbreeding. I mean, literally, it was that. I read in the research that they took her child, which literally threw her over anxiety and again, issues.
Could be another piece of that puzzle that gets us where we end up here.
And I understood they killed the peasant boy. They're like, it may not come down to say they actually killed the peasant boy, but the mom was like, oh, you don't have to worry about him ever again, kind of deal.
She was raised Calvinist Protestant. And as a young woman, she learned Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek. She was born into a privileged family of nobility, so she was endowed with wealth, education, and prominent social rank. So in 1953, like you said, she's engaged to marry the Count Ferenc Nadezhdy.
Yes.
we'll have,
however you pronounce
we
that.
are going to tear up
Just
some names. In
please
this one.
bear with us. He was a very fierce warrior, fighting for the king, earning his right, lands, accumulating his own money. So, I mean, this was a good marriage from family to family.
Well, and more than likely, it was a political arrangement for obvious
Absolutely.
reasons. You know, they were
Absolutely.
nobility. They were married on May 8th of 1575.
I think she was about 15 years age at that time frame.
And then talk about a wedding gift. Nadazdi's wedding gift, Bathory, was his household. The castle of Zelt, or Zelt, again, we're going to butcher the name. And it was situated in the Little Carpathians near Vagulgeli and Trenčín, which is modern-day Nové Mesto, Nadvahom.
God bless you for getting these words, Bill.
Slovakia.
Slovakia. That I recognize.
That's
I
a place,
recognize. That's
right?
a place. I've heard of that. I've seen that on a map.
So she also got a country home and 17 adjacent villages.
That's a pretty good wedding gift.
So in 1578, Nadazdi became the chief commander of the Hungarian soldiers, and he led them to war against the Ottomans. Now, with her husband away, Bathory managed the business affairs and the estates, and her role also included responsibility for the Hungarian and the Slovak people that she was in her kingdom.
And I got to stress how uncommon that was. Now, at the same time frame, one of my descendants or ancestors, Queen Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth Tudor, was probably one of the only other female strong arms, if you will, in Welly that called the shot.
Yeah.
But her husband was always away on war. Literally,
Count Nadazdi.
Yes, that is the proper term.
That's probably the third different way I've said it since we started.
But you got to keep in mind this entire area was just constantly at war. The Northlands were controlled by the hierarchy. The Southern lands were the Turks and animalistic army. I mean, it was a lot of bloodshed. So he was gone often, and she called the shots. She ran the business. She did it all the time. Yeah,
she was charged with defense of the estates, which were en route to Vienna. So they were on a well-traveled path, and the threat of attack was significant. And the village of Sajet, which is probably wrong, had previously been plundered by the Ottomans, so it was a target. And, and she led those soldiers.
Stepped right up.
Now, there's also some rumors at the time that she was compassionate and that she would take care of the women that found themselves in dire straits. And there's even one story of a woman who was raped by soldiers that she helped step in and make sure that the baby was taken care of. And if I remember correctly, tried to identify the soldier and bring him to justice. So there's not... I mean, she's not completely heartless.
No, and I also, and again, probably because of her upbringing and her training, I actually read where she practiced some of the healing skills at the time and often donated her time trying to care for the sick and stuff like you were saying.
Yeah, no, she's known to have provided medical care during what they called the Long War in 1593 to 1606. So she's not heartless. She's not a monster, despite how she was described and some of the atrocities that will later be attributed to her.
I was like a teeter-totter while I was researching this story. Really, I mean, you hear the whole story of Elizabeth Bathory and, bathing in blood of maidens and virgins. And I will say in the research, I try to find the facts. I found several references where, while this was an arranged marriage, I found where I do believe they truly loved each other.
It seems like they had a lot in common, which we'll get into.
Several kids.
Yeah.
But we're gonna step back just a little bit when she was younger, and some of her training. And again, she was brought up very noble, a lot of training. There was one of her teachers, scholars, however you want to put it, that was teaching her how to plant seeds and grow plants and trees. Well, I guess she brought one of these clay pot or whatever they had planted in it, and brought it back to her scholar at one time afterwards. And she had planted a live chick, a baby chicken. She'd uprooted the plant that had grown from a seed.
No, that's not how you grow full-size chickens.
That is not, but I'm trying to kind of get her mindset. She planted the live chick in the dirt, covered it up, and then brought this back, and she seemed to be shocked. I'm guessing she's probably 8-10 years old at this time frame. When she brought it to the scholar, and it's like, the chick is decaying. There's maggots. There's worms. Why did it not grow like the seed that you taught me?
Now see here. I am going to say that a lot of her story, I think, gets exaggerated over the years. Mm-hmm. And I think I've said this in other stories. One of those classic telltale signs of a budding psychopath is that ability to torture animals and not understand. you know, and again, I think maybe that's a story that gets tacked on later. Maybe that's something that did happen. You know,
Maybe it did, maybe it didn't.
I do have that some have said that maybe her later cruelty was that she was trained by her family to be cruel. They were nobles of the time, and so
it was a time of war.
Yeah, and the peasantry just didn't matter to the nobles.
I know it said in a couple of instances I researched that her father would lead her out and make her witness, you know, torturing, beheadings. This is what you're going to grow up in life, especially being a woman.
Well,
it's going to be harder in a man's world at that time.
That first part in Game of Thrones where they have to behead the guy who broke his vows. And they tell the young kid, you have to watch this. This is part of your upbringing.
Yes.
There's rumors that she was taught by family members of Satanism and witchcraft even.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's no hard evidence for these claims. So a lot of them, you know, they don't have any proof to back them up.
Throw it to the wall and see what sticks.
So we talked about how she had children.
Mm-hmm.
Her first daughter with Count Nadasdy was Anna, born in 1585. She does have other known children, which is Orsolya, Catalin, Andras, Paul, and then some sources say that they also had another son named Miklos, although his birth is not confirmed. There's no record of him ever actually being born. And it could be that he was simply a cousin, or maybe he died before there was any sort of documentation.
But at least 5 children.
Yes, but all of her children were cared for by a governess. She wasn't directly involved in their upbringing.
And I thought that was odd. Maybe she kind of resented her family making her be so involved that she removed her children from that.
And that's possible.
But I did find on all accounts, she made sure they were very well taken care of. Even after her death, I mean, it was arranged where all of them were taken care of.
I believe later on it's possible that Paul may have been involved in some of what happened. And I think he's the youngest, so maybe, you know, since he was the baby. But on January 4th, 1604, at the age of 48, Count Ferenc Nadasdy dies. Now, the exact nature of his illness, they don't know what it is that killed him.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to have started in 1601 with debilitating pain in his legs. That sounds like maybe diabetes, possibly, you know, diabetic neuropathy. But from that time, he never fully recovered. 1603, became permanently disabled. 1604, he passes away.
And again, I will stress, hearing his name, they said just put terror in the opponents, whoever he was facing. He was not a man to stand against. He and his army, the king was really, truly monetarily in debt too for all of the lands that he won.
And I think we may have touched on this earlier. You know, a lot of people think that they participated together in her cruelties.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, he may have actually helped to temper her a little bit, hold her back. Because apparently, you know, the biggest part of the Bathory story that we commonly know happens after his death.
Right.
And so with his death, there was no one there to hold her back anymore.
Well, you're seeing all these things. She had a child that was taken away from her. Possibly the love of her life at that time was killed.
Yeah, she's seen horrific military punishments and tortures.
I mean, these things are going to shape you one way or another, and not for the good usually.
So somewhere between 1602 and 1604, rumors of Bathory's atrocities began to spread throughout the kingdom, and a Lutheran minister named Istvan Magyari went and made formal complaints against her, both in public and at court in Vienna. So sometime during 1610, King Matthias II, here's going to be another name that I'm going to butcher, he assigned Yuri Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, to investigate. He ordered 2 notaries, Andras Karasturi and Moses Zeraki, and please forgive me because I am butchering these, but he ordered them to collect evidence in March. By October, they had collected over 52 witness statements, and by 1611, that number had risen to over 300. So people were testifying against Bathory. Now, weren't really delved into what she was accused of. According to the testimonies, her victims included girls aged 10 to 14, and said that she had begun killing the daughters of the lesser gentry who people sent to her to sort of raise as wards, you know, to bring them up in the society, to bring them up in nobility, to teach them the ways of the noble woman.
As many as 600.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, and this isn't my words, but you can see she was labeled as one of the most horrific serial killers.
Now, we hadn't really got into what she's done. I've got a list here, and just before we start digging into this one, warning, some of these are a little grisly
and graphic. Yes.
So I don't want anybody to go in this saying that I didn't give you a chance to bow out. If you want to skip ahead a few minutes, the Bathory was suspected of doing all kinds of horrific tortures, and between her and some of her servants, and possibly her youngest, Paul, witnesses claimed. And I'm just going to go through a list here, and Eric, if you need to expand on anything, that she stabbed her victims. Mm-hmm. Simple. That she bit them on their breasts, hands, faces, arms, and sometimes genitalia.
Yes.
She would cut them, cut their noses, cut their lips using scissors.
I had, and again, this is kind of graphic, but would get to the point, burning pubic hairs, possibly damaging sexual organs.
She would whip them with stinging nettles. Stick needles through lips and fingers.
Had kind of an anger management issue. Like one servant, I'll use the word maybe backtalked or question an order. She nonchalantly, again with no facial features, got up, came across the room, threw the woman down, allegedly, on a table, broke her jaw, just literally using her hands and her strength, just ripped the servant's jaws, broke her jaws.
She would burn people with red-hot irons, coins, or keys. Strip them naked and force them into fatal ice baths.
I had that where they would strip them, and again, in that area, it gets very cold and frigid. Yeah. Would throw them out overnight and throw buckets of water on them naked, and literally they would find the corpses frozen to the cobblestone the next day.
She would cover people in honey, leave them outside for the insects to devour. One documented case was claims that an unfortunate girl was forced to cook and eat her own flesh.
I had not come across that. Doesn't surprise me, though.
Now, I do know she was accused of bathing in the blood of virgins to retain her youthful good looks and vigor. Now, those stories don't figure in. The first documented instance of anyone saying that she bathed in blood happened 100 years later. No one accused her of that at the time.
I do have kind of a little bit more I want to spin off here. I believe this would have been after the death of her husband, but she reportedly had an affair with a younger nobleman, almost half her age. And she became fearful when he was whisked away by his father, who had also arranged a wedding for his son and not to her. So he kind of disappeared, and she began to really kind of go off the deep end here, even possibly more, thinking that it was because of her age. Her appearance was old. So she kind of developed this fetish to try to find a way to stop aging, or the fountain of youth, if you will. One of the stories that is pretty commonly told is she was having a servant girl brush her hair, and she was looking at herself in the mirror, and the servant girl maybe got a little rough, pulled some of her hair, and Elizabeth Bathory, again, kind of had one of her anger fits and turned to her and is like, I'm going bald already. You don't have to help me. You're pulling my hair out, and hit her. Now, some said punched her. Some said maybe used the hairbrush, but broke the girl's nose, and the blood got on her hand. And in the account, she used this almost like a lotion and rubbed the blood on her hand. And as she would see herself in the mirror, she felt it removed the wrinkles.
But, by all accounts, from what I've found, she was considered an attractive woman.
Yes.
And she died at the age of 54. So that's not, it's not outrageously old. Of course, at the time, people had some hard living. So.
I will say, as one historian, so adequately put on the internet, there was one main painting that's known to exist that's locked up in a museum, and he said the same thing. She's not an unattractive woman, but he goes, then again, due to her fierceness, would you be the artist that would maybe paint her in a non-good mode?
Fantastic question. Maybe we only know her to be attractive because who would want to paint her otherwise?
Well, again, going back to this story, this particular poor servant girl that she broke the nose, she became kind of attracted to that she was the fountain of youth with her blood. And I had in the research that they kept her, and for many, many months would literally cut her in different places, drain the blood, and she would rub it on almost like makeup, around her eyes. And again, I will stress, when she looked at herself in the mirror, she believed it made her look younger. She asked several of her most trusted colleagues and servants, and they were honest with her, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. You look beautiful, but nothing changed.
Well, and again, do you want to be the person that's like, oh no, you look like an old hag?
Now, interesting enough, I never made this connection, but this is where the whole mirror, mirror on the wall from the Disney tale kind of is said to have come full turn. But in her mind, she believed this blood was making her younger. And again, she was longing for this nobleman who had been swept away, who came back, was off and again and on again. But anyhow, this poor girl finally, I'm assuming they just bled her dry, if you will. She just her body wouldn't recoup. So when she lost that may have started the killing sprees, find me more, kind of deal. So
beyond just the tortures and such that she had been accused of, some witnesses named relatives who had died while in Bathory's care, and some had reported seeing traces of torture on the dead bodies. Some were buried in graveyards, others were buried in unmarked graves, and the bodies were never seen. 2 court officials claimed to have personally witnessed the Countess torture and kill young servant girls. There were other rumors that say she believed that by drinking the blood of these young girls that she could preserve her youthful good looks.
I'll kind of interject here. Early on with let's say the first 12 or 15 victims, by all accounts, it appears that she reported them appropriately. They had church burials, but there was like 12 or 15 girls that died in a small period of time. People start asking questions. There was allegedly some money going to the clergymen or priests to kind of keep their mouth shut. And then as we led into some of the winter, obviously the area got colder and colder, and they couldn't dig graves. So they stopped taking them to the appropriate officials, if you would dig shallow graves out in the woods or nearby in the frozen ground the best they could, try to take care of the bodies in that way as things kind of escalated.
Yeah. On December 30th, Thurzo goes to the castle, and he arrests Bathory along with 4 of her servants. These 4 were accused of being her accomplices, her primary accomplices. Dorotoya, Simtez, Ilona Jo, Katerina Benica, and Janos Ujvari.
Now, did I read right that one of those was like a dwarf?
That's possible. I did not see that anywhere.
I think I read that, which they said was almost kind of a ploy off the Game of Thrones. And okay.
3 of them were found guilty and executed, while the 4th was sentenced to life in prison. According to a letter between Thurzo and his wife, his unannounced visit did find 1 dead girl and another living, quote, prey girl in the castle when he arrived. It's commonly believed that they caught her in the act of torture, but none of the documentation at the time states that. As a matter of fact, the documentation says she was at the table having dinner when they arrived at the castle to arrest her.
I'm going to kind of take the opposite side here for her. And again, I'm not condoning any of this by any means, but at the time, it was not uncommon to torture servants, slaves. This was done by men many times, and that's kind of where the story is.
What she was doing, like the way she was going about it, more than what she was doing. Yes, it's common to torture, but she was really taking it to
the next extreme. Level. Just to say that she was torturing servants, and that was commonly done.
And
not
I
that
don't
it was
think
right,
it's the torturing of servants that was the problem. It's these noble children that were sent to her.
Yeah.
So now a lot of people said that Thurzo had caught her, red-handed. But even his documentation, she was detained prior to the discovery of victims, and it seems likely that the claim that he found her covered in blood is clearly fake too.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, the story gets punched up over the years. Thurzo debated further proceedings with Bathory's son Paul and 2 of her sons-in-law. Her family, of course, ruled Transylvania, as it was known at the time, and there are rumors that's possible that Bathory didn't even do the things she was accused of. It was simply politically motivated to remove her from power and to seize those lands.
She owned a lot of property and had a lot of power, and a lot of people resented that.
I mean, she was a powerful woman in times when there weren't powerful women.
Now, I did find one source going back to the whole blood draining and all this. To Bill's point, no. You see the horror movies and stuff where literally she had like a clawfoot bathtub that she's literally bathing in pools of blood. I think that's way far-fetched. But I did find one account where she or someone in her company had went to the blacksmith, tinkerer, or whatever, to design a machine with spikes, and I'm going to call it like an Iron Maiden type object, that would drain blood. And the reasoning for it was the whole witch thing. She said that she wanted to drain the liquid out of the witch's body so they could burn easier without the moisture inside. And then, some kind of took that, well, here's the sign. She had this monstrosity of this machine constructed, and she was bathing in it. Again, there might have been, like with most stories, a little pinch of truth there, but it was definitely, I think, dialed up.
I think a lot of the story gets punched up over the years because you find that, and again, what official documentation you're going to maintain from that time frame, but a lot of the even the stuff that we do have access to does not have a lot of the story as we came to know it eventually.
Yeah. Now, another interesting tidbit here, and again, this is kind of a sensitive nature, but it was said that she was possibly bisexual. Some said that she was quite possibly a nymphomaniac, one of those obsessed with sex, and especially bondage and torture. And it is said that her husband was also very much into bondage with servants and possibly having menage a trois, orgies, this type of thing. From a political standpoint,
are you trying to besmirch the Nadazdi name?
Maybe if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck. But another political aspect was, if she was truly a nymphomaniac, obsessed with sex, her husband was away, she would have sex with women, because obviously, therefore, there would be no chance of children, which would obviously pull her down from that power. She was very concerned, it seemed to be her whole life, and I think she had reason to be, that people were out to get her, to take that power from her.
Well, Thurzo, along with Paul and her sons-in-laws, had originally planned for Bathory to be sent to a nunnery for the remainder of her life, but as accounts of her actions spread and her notoriety increased, they instead decided to keep her under what we would call a very strict form of house arrest.
And I saw some stories they bricked her in her bedroom.
And again, some say they bricked her up in a room with just slots for food and stuff. The official account is that she had full run of the castle. She just couldn't leave the castle. So
now, interesting enough, she never went to trial.
No, there was never a trial for Bathory.
The servants and people that they interviewed, which was hosts that turned evidence against her, however, were put on trial, and most of them were put to death.
Well, because of her status, her noble status, they did not want a full-blown trial. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but just she was too powerful to do that too.
Yeah.
So the highest number of victims cited during the trial of Bathory's accomplices was 650.
That's a lot.
And that number comes from a claim by a servant girl named Susanna to one of the court officials that she had seen that name in one of she had seen that number in one of Bathory's private books. So again, she was a servant girl. She was peasantry. She may not have been properly educated. She's citing a number. She might not even be able to read or write. So who knows?
Right. Make your mark here, and it was an X kind of thing.
This book was never turned over as evidence. No one ever saw it in court. So on January 25th, 1611, Thurzo wrote a letter to King Matthias describing that they had captured and confined Bathory to her castle. She was never put on trial because of her family standing. She was detained in the castle of Zhet, however you say it, for the remainder of her life.
I think it was about 4 years is what I saw, that she, whether she was bricked into a room or confined to the castle, she lived another 4 years or so.
Like you said, it was written that she was locked up in a bricked room or she was confined to a single room.
And that could have been the Hollywood aspect,
But according to visitors, even that she had like free roam of the house, or castle, as it were. Now, she wrote out a will in September of 1610 and left all of her current and future inheritances to her children. In the last month of 1614, so this would have been after about 3 years of confinement, she signed an arrangement which distributed her estates, her lands, and her possessions equally among her children. So, on the evening of August 20th of 1614, she complained to her bodyguard that her hands were cold, and he replied, quote, "It's nothing, mistress, just go and lie down." And she went to sleep, and she was found dead the following morning. And she was buried in the church of the castle grounds on November 25th, 1614. And according to some, the villagers were not happy with her being buried on church ground. Her body was eventually moved to her home at Exzed, where it was interred in the Bathory family crypt. The location of her body today is unknown, and there's nothing in the Zhet church or the castle that bears any markings to give any indicator that she was reburied there at some point. Now, there are several authors who argue that Bathory was the victim of conspiracy. We've talked about that a little bit. An author by the name of Nagy argued that the proceedings against her were largely politically motivated, like we said earlier, due to her extensive wealth and ownership of large areas of land that the crown would have liked to have controlled instead of being in her control.
Well, and it was known that the king himself owed the family quite a substantial debt, and of course, by removing her out of that office, debt's paid. So there's that.
There's sort of counter arguments to a lot of things to support her innocence. The testimony of around 300 witnesses and physical evidence that was reportedly collected has, was disputed in a lot of cases, contradictory to what was being testified in favor of. And it's possible that Thurzo even misrepresented the dead and the wounded patients that we said, she was treating people.
Right.
So possibly these wounded and these dead that were found on castle grounds may have been patients. She was taking care of them.
Well, and again, you mentioned early on in the podcast with the epileptic fits, the falling sickness, as it was called.
Yeah.
The practice was to have healthy blood that you put on the body. So, one could kind of go down that and understand and help explain some of that.
Well, and it's also said that Thurzo himself had political motivations and was wanting to make a name for himself. And obviously disgracing one of the most powerful nobles of your area would help to elevate yourself.
Step right up.
She served as the inspiration for a lot of stories over the years. Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, an anime, is sort of inspired by her story, or at least parts of it. There have been countless movies made about the Blood Countess.
As a vintage toy collector, there's the Faces of Madness. There's a set of toys that was put out, and it has her in this beautifully Victorian clawfoot tub bathing in blood with candelabras. She has her own action figure, there's all of this.
But again, how much of it was punched up over the years? How much of it was made up? You have historical researchers arguing that the things that she was accused of, she didn't even do.
Well, there's actually a new resurgence, and I think it started about 2015, 2016 in that area of Hungary, where they are trying to prove her innocence and try to, kind of lift that cloud that, often we get whipped up in the whole Hollywood film and horror genre, and they're trying to find evidence. And as you said, it's very hard to find evidence because a lot of it was done away with. I think a lot of it they didn't want to be found, so there was no evidence recorded.
Well, and you're talking 400 years ago.
Yeah, that's not easy.
And again, she was a powerful woman at a time when there weren't powerful women, so you can understand there were a lot of people who probably would have loved to have seen her knock down a peg.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking a time when the world was rife with superstition. There are bodies found buried in that time frame with stakes through the heart, and, their heads decapitated with a brick put in their mouth for the sole purpose of them not coming back from the dead. So you have a superstitious populace that's easily swayed by the by the voices of their respected royalty. You've got this guy who's investigating on behalf of the king. She's got a reputation, and she probably had a reputation for being hardcore. You know what I mean?
She would have to.
She was leading armies.
She would have
while
to
her
be.
husband was gone.
Yeah.
So for lack of a better word, she's probably a bitch.
Yeah.
And there were probably plenty of people that wanted to see her taken down.
Now, I will say, depending on what story you want to follow with her confinement, we'll call it, all the mirrors and stuff I had found in several accounts were removed from the castle or her room, depending on whatever story you want to follow, that she was still obsessed with her appearance. I did also find some kind of underlying notes that she had turned to human cannibalism on herself, where she would bite herself for blood in the last few days.
You would call that auto-cannibalism.
Thank you. Yeah, cannibalism obviously is eating of someone else. Again, the stories are so hyped up, you don't know what to believe. I will say, based on her family's mental, physical history, the things she saw as a child would have to have been traumatic.
Well, and you touched on it earlier. Nobility tended to be inbred at the time, which leads to mental instabilities.
I don't think she was totally innocent by any means.
No, there's probably a grain of truth to it. There's probably a piece of this that she was definitely doing some things that weren't kosher. But, maybe the, bathing in the pools of blood and all that.
Super over-exaggerated.
Some of that was probably, combined. Like I said, it was punched up to make a good story.
The art of the storyteller. I mean, that's exactly what it's all about.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. I mean, if we just told you there was this really cool chick that was a royalty nobility leader, that wouldn't be much of a...
there's not much story in that.
Not much story there. But well, this is just yet another example of what you would find on Nightmares on the Lost Highway. Thank you so much for listening. We'd like to give a shout out to our first paying sponsor, Raven's Loft. That's our family shop here located in Lebanon, Missouri. It's your one-stop gaming, vintage toy, and collectible shop where you can find Star Wars, Transformers, G.I. Joe, comics, vinyl records, role-play gaming, Magic the Gathering, and so much more. We're located here at 223 West Commercial, downtown Lebanon, and also in our second location, also here in Lebanon at the Heartland Antique Mall. We'd like to thank Raven's Loft for, again, supporting Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.